Welcome to the American Security Council Protecting Our Freedoms podcast. The mission of the American Security Council is to educate and engage American citizens on national security matters, economic security matters, and the need for moral leadership in the United States of America. Please enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to Protecting Our Freedoms podcast. I'm your host, Joy Votrobek. And today is our fourth series of Education in Crisis featuring Dr. Karen Hiltz. Please visit our website at www.ascf.us and you can view all of our previous Education in Crisis podcasts where we are discussing critical race theory and other issues to do with that, as well as mask mandates and some very troubling statistics that we'll bring up today. We would appreciate your support while you're there, and for every donation of $25 or more, you will receive a free copy of Mark Levin's American Marxism, which is one of the very popular books in America today. We will be discussing today the history of education in America, from the Founding Fathers through Noah Webster to Horace Mann. Karen, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back. This is very exciting.
Yes, it is. And as I said, those statistics you gave us last time, specifically about history, were very troubling. That by the time they reach graduation, we're only at 11% proficiency rate in the national level.
Yes, the national average.
At national average. Thank you. So if we can dive into history and how it actually got started here in the United States, can you walk us through education in America and how it got started?
Sure. First of all, let me say that education has been going on ever since creation, or the beginning of time, I'll say, because life is full of lessons. We don't need to go to a building in order to learn. And so therefore, children back in the day, and we'll go back to the year 100, the year 500, the year 1000, whatever. And children learned from their parents how to till the soil and grow what they needed and make the clothing that they had and build the structures that they lived in and stuff. So we don't necessarily think of that as learning today, because we think of learning as an education system, going to a school, etc. But that was all part of learning and how to survive in life at that time. Fast forward to the 1600s and 1700s, and we have more of a formal education, which was found in Greek and Roman times and things of that nature as well. But today, when we talk about education, we talk about a formal, structured education, and that's what we know of today. So what is the purpose of education? I think a lot of people are kind of asking that question nowadays with regards to some of the things our children are learning. But let me go back and provide some quotes that I found interesting from our founding fathers. And I'm sure all of you will recognize who these people are. George Washington stated, "All I am, I owe to my mother. I attribute all my success in life to the moral, intellectual, and physical education I received from her." So George Washington was obviously very dependent upon his mother. John Adams stated, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Thomas Jefferson, "I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power." And all of us, some of you may not know, but Thomas Jefferson was the founder of the University of Virginia, which is still in existence today, and a very prestigious university at that.
But I like that quote.
Benjamin Franklin stated, "A Bible and a newspaper in every house, a good school in every district, all studied and appreciated as they merit, are the principal support of virtue, morality, and civil liberty." Thank you, Ben. And then someone who we don't necessarily recognize as a founding father, but was very instrumental to education, is Noah Webster. And he stated, "Every child in America should be acquainted with his own country. He should read books that furnish him with ideas that will be useful to him in life and practice. As soon as he opens his lips, he should rehearse the history of his own country."
Thank you. And to his comment right there, and what we were saying earlier, only 89% of our students that are graduating would be proficient in history. So,
And also, another point to make out, another thing to point out is that the oldest institution, formal higher education institution in America, is Harvard University.
I did not know that either.
It was founded in 1636 by a clergyman named John Harvard. So I find it interesting that all of our founding fathers, and even the founder of prestigious Harvard University, all talk about and bring in the importance and the value of the Bible and God, and how that sets a foundation for the education of our children.
But today we're not really seeing that. At least with Harvard, we know it's pretty progressive.
Yes, yes.
So we have gone away from the center, it seems like, what they had started.
Yes, yes, we are straying from our founding fathers' concept of what a proper education should be.
And second, you had mentioned Noah Webster last there. Would you go a little more into what Noah Webster's influence was on education?
For those of you who, probably the first thing that comes to mind when anybody talks about Noah Webster is the Webster Dictionary.
That's what I thought of. Yes, exactly.
Because that's what he's most known for. Because Noah Webster was very much interested in words and language. He just, from a very early age, he was born in 1758 in West Hartford, Connecticut, for those of you who may be interested. And like I said, he's most known for the Webster Dictionary. Back when he went to school, he actually lived in one of two colonies that actually had compulsory, mandatory education. So as a child, or compulsory schooling, and so as a child, he was required, based on the colony that he lived in, to attend school. And so because of his interest in writing and words and stuff, at the age of 13, he wrote his very first article that got published. Mind you, he wrote it anonymous because he was only 13 years of age. And back then it was unheard of for someone who was, quote, uneducated and young like that to be published. So he wrote an anonymous letter to the editor. And that began his love for writing and for the written word and stuff. But Noah Webster is not only known for the dictionary. For example, did you know he was a policy advisor to George Washington?
I didn't.
He did. During the Revolutionary War, he advised through the written word, writing letters to George Washington. He counted houses, which gave rise to the first census of 1790. Okay, so thank you to Noah Webster for paving that path to create a census. Now, that's got good things and bad things about it, but irregardless, that's a census, and that actually is a good thing from the perspective that it helps with regards to allocation of our elected representatives. So that's one of the things that's instrumental in that. He drafted America's first copyright laws.
Really?
Yes, he did. And he helped found Amherst College. Some of you may know of Amherst College. It's up in the New England states. I can't remember, I think it's Massachusetts, but I'm not positive on that one. And he also served as a state legislator. So he's got many accomplishments, and those are only some. There are more. But one thing I'd like to point out is that he wrote the first American spelling book. It was published in volumes in the 1780s, and it included a speller, a grammar, and a reader. So there again, you can see his focus was on making sure that people learned how to read and to spell and to properly speak. his reader, which was the most successful, it was actually used for over a century.
Wow.
So as you can see, Noah Webster, even though he isn't accredited as being one of the founding fathers, when you read in history about our Constitution and Declaration and things like that, he really did have a fairly significant role to play with regards to, in an advisory capacity, because he not only advised George Washington, but he advised James Madison and some other known founding fathers. And he was involved in government, and also education.
So I learned a lot now about Noah Webster, other than just Webster's dictionary today.
Well, hopefully that was informative to
Yes,
our audience
thank you.
today. But I'd like to point out, because I'm involved with the Noah Webster Educational Foundation, is one of the reasons why I delved into learning more about Noah Webster and what he actually stood for. But there's a book by Joshua Kendall, and it's titled The Forgotten Founding Father. And I would like to share a quote from that book with you. Mr. Kendall writes, "But Webster had done more than just improve on the spelling books of his British predecessors. He had also helped give birth to a new language, which in turn would soon unite a fledgling nation." One of the things that he wrote about in this book was that during the time of Noah Webster's days and stuff, the nation was trying to find itself. We had gone through the Revolutionary War, and we were trying to decide on what type of government we were going to have, and who was going to participate, and all this kind of stuff. And Noah Webster was instrumental in identifying that in order to have a country, a united country, you had to have a united or uniting language. And so therefore he was very, very diligent, I'll say, and persistent about the grammar and the language that we used here in America, because it is different from British, from English, British English. And he was very attuned to that, and he said that he believes that that's one way to unite the colonies and bring us into one country.
So the British English is not in the Webster's dictionary?
Well,
Because they say some quirky things sometimes.
they do. They spell some things a little differently. They may pronounce the same, but they're spelled a little
I
differently or
agree.
whatever.
Yes.
And meanings are different too.
That's
Yes.
true. Yeah. That's a
So-
lot with translation.
Yes.
And having different language groups in different countries can sometimes be a big divide.
Yeah.
So that's important. I did not know all this about Noah Webster.
Well, I've lived in England twice, and I remember my neighbor telling me, having a conversation with one of my neighbors, and they were like saying something about English and stuff, and I said, well, I speak English. And she says, but you don't speak the Queen's English.
Yes, I've heard that.
So I was like, okay, no, I don't. So,
We speak American.
yes.
Well, the third one that you mentioned, this Horace Mann, actually, I did not know who he was when you mentioned him before. So if you can tell us a little more about Horace Mann. I did not know he was so instrumental, just like Webster, a more detailed account of Horace Mann, I guess, if you could give us.
Okay. For those of you who study education, Horace Mann should be a common name to you, because he's known as the father of education here in America. He actually was a lawyer and a politician up in the Massachusetts area. And, but in the 1830s, doing the reform movements, he got very interested in education. And so he's instrumental in reforming education. How that came about for him is that Massachusetts established a board of education in 1837. And so Mann was invited to be the secretary of the board. So he left his political aspirations or his political career, and he became the first secretary of the Board of Education in Massachusetts. It had limited power, okay, but the initial role was to collect and publish education information, and he served 11 years in this capacity and stuff. And he created something called the Common School Journal. And that was created to help teachers learn what they needed to learn to be teachers, but he also used it as a way to engage through lectures within communities and stuff. So it was not only a way for him to help teachers become better teachers at that time, but also to inform the public with regards to education and his, well, what I'll call his vision or his aspirations with regards to what the education system should be. And his pedagogy led to 6 fundamental propositions, and these are the propositions. And let me know what you think about them.
Okay.
The first one is that a republic cannot long remain ignorant and free, hence the necessity of universal popular education. Number 2, that such education must be paid for, controlled, and sustained by an interested public. Number 3, that such education is best provided in schools embracing children of all religious, social, and ethnic backgrounds. 4, that such education, while profoundly moral in character, must be free of sectarian religious influence. Interesting.
Yes.
Number 5, that such education must be permeated throughout by the spirit, methods, and discipline of a free society, which preclude harsh pedagogy in the classroom. And then number 6 is that such education can be provided only by well-trained professional teachers.
So it sounds like he went against some of the founding fathers' ideas of education.
I would say that he had his own perspective with regards to education. I find the thing that popped out at me with regards to this one, to this information, is that he states that, which one is it? Number 3 says that such education is best provided by schools embracing children of all religious, social, and ethnic backgrounds. But then in the next one, it says that such education, while profoundly moral in character, must be free of sectarian religious influence. So he wants children with a religious background, but he doesn't want religion in the school, is my interpretation of this reading. Now, he did get resistance.
I could assume he would. From that would just what you're saying there.
Yeah. Because remember, the founding of our country, of our republic, is based on a belief in our Creator, whether you want to call him God or our Creator or Father or whatever you want to say, there is that element and that foundation of religion or a belief in a higher power within the founding of our republic. And so Horace Mann was not necessarily quite on board with that. And so, so that's why one of the reasons why there was some resistance is because back then in the 1700s, early 1800s, and into the mid-1800s, our country was very Protestant in nature.
Yes.
And when the immigrants started coming over from Europe, especially during the Irish famine, potato famine back in the day and stuff, and a lot of Irish Catholics started coming to America. And some of our politicians had a hard time with that. Because by the time that migration started, we had taxpayer-funded public schools. And Horace Mann was instrumental in ensuring that tax dollars paid for the education of our children. Okay?
Yeah, that's something I just learned. You pointed out there that he was pushing for this education to be open to everyone that would be paying, that were interested in education. So,
and that our tax dollars would pay for children to be educated. And I don't know, there's varying degrees of acceptance of that. You could debate that one for a long time, but But anyway, there was resistance of this, but he was instrumental in linking taxpayer dollars to funding public education.
That's interesting.
But he resigned and became president of Antioch College in Ohio in 1848. So he left Massachusetts and went to Ohio to start a school, become president of Antioch College, I should say. And the last thing that I'll talk about is a lot of times when you talk about Horace Mann and then you get into the tax dollars that go along with funding public school, public education and stuff, I can't help but bring in the Blaine Amendment. You may have heard of the Blaine Amendment.
I have not, just like Horace Mann.
Okay.
I was surprised by that.
Well, back in 1875, there was a representative from Maine named James G. Blaine. Okay, and he proposed an amendment that would amend the U.S. Constitution, and the intent of that amendment was to limit the use of public funds. There again, I said because there were Protestants, it was dominant Protestant. The Catholics started migrating. There were some within our Congress at that time who did not want to fund Catholic schools. If you were Catholic, then they did not want public dollars paying for your children to learn Catholicism. They wanted you to learn the Protestant way, okay? And actually, some people at that time dubbed this as the anti-Catholic amendment. So that gives you a little bit more information on that. But there again, it was, the intent was to limit the use of public funds. Well, it didn't pass, as you know, because it's not in the U.S. Constitution, but you'll find Blaine Amendment, what's referred to as Blaine Amendment language in state constitutions. And there are several not all state constitutions, but the majority of them do have a section under their education article that state public funds may be used solely or only for public education or public institutions. Okay? So that's one of the issues, and let's fast forward a little bit to more current time. That in itself is one of the issues with regards to school choice.
That's what came to mind when you said
Yes.
taxpayers and schools.
Because in order for these scholarships and vouchers and things of that nature to occur, there's been a lot of litigation over the decades with regards to can public dollars pay for a child to leave public school and go to another school of their choice. And there have been some wins and some losses on that. We've had some wins fairly recently. I know there's a case in Ohio that put that issue to bed for the state of Ohio. It's I think it's Lemon versus Simmons Harris, I think is the case on that. And it stated that case, and I'm deviating here, sorry, I'm diverting here, but that case stated that the scholarship was written in such a manner that the money goes to the parent for the child. That parent chooses the best educational environment for their child. So if they send their child to an academy, say a STEM academy, private STEM academy, or if they send it to their child to a Catholic school or a Christian school, then that's the parent's right to choose the best environment, educational environment for their child. So that case was upheld, and so therefore in the state of Ohio, scholarships can be sent to the parents and children can go
so they
to
can
private
get state
schools.
money to go to whatever school
Yes.
they choose.
Now, it may not be equal value,
Okay.
what it costs to send what we call per pupil cost for public school. It may not be the same value, and oftentimes it's not, but still, there are some things like that. There was a current case in Montana.
I was going to say, are there
as
any
well.
other states that do that you know of?
There's a scholarship case that was challenged in the state of, I think it was Montana, last year or the year before, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. Actually, both of these cases went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they both sided with the plaintiff, I guess. So the scholarship money can be used for the best interest of the child as decided by the parent.
And I'm guessing there's pushbacks to that from
yes.
the public school system, because that's taking away from the public school system dollars then.
Yep. And the interesting thing too about the Blaine Amendment, because it didn't back in the late 1800s, because it didn't pass at the U.S. level. In some cases where states were making application to become a state, going through the process to become a state, having Blaine Amendment language in your Constitution was part of getting acceptance as a state.
Wow.
So that was one of the carrots, hammers,
Okay.
whatever
Did
you
not
want to
know
call
that
it, to becoming a state. So that's another little tidbit with regards to some of the history of education.
Well, thank
and
you. I
the use.
appreciate you bringing us up to speed on the education here in America, and how it came about, and Webster's interesting roles that I was not aware of other than the Webster Dictionary, and Horace Mann.
Thank you. Yes, I find it very helpful to understand our history so that we know how to move forward and have a more engaged and informed dialogue and decision-making process. So.
Well, as the quotes by some of our founding fathers suggested, that's what we need in this nation.
Yes, definitely so.
Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
I think that's probably about it with regards to some of the history, some of the basic fundamental aspects of the history of education in America. Hopefully that was informative
Yes,
and
very.
of interest.
And I've learned something here today for sure.
Good.
Hopefully I'm not part of that 11% that graduated and didn't know.
No.
I'm catching up. Thank you, Karen, for joining us again on Protecting Our Freedoms podcast and continuing our dialogue here on education in crisis. Thank you, everyone, for listening today. And our podcast can be found again on www.ascf.us. They can also be found on YouTube and Rumble by typing in American Security Council Foundation. We would appreciate your support here at the American Security Council, and a donation of $25 or more. We will send you Mark Levin's American Marxism book, where he does talk about education in here. It's very interesting. A very good seller as well. And we thank you for having on the show again, joining us today. And please join us again next time as we talk more about protecting your freedoms.